You should go to bed now. Is there anything else I can get you?
No. You had your chance.
The possession genre is one that at times it can feel like has been done to death, with any contemporary entries feeling like they're just beating a dead horse over and over again, but never managing to crawl out of the colossal shadow of films like The Exorcist, which I'm pretty comfortable saying is still, over 50 years later, the greatest possession movie of all time. But I don't think it's fair to say that there's nothing left to explore in the genre, or that no new creative angles can be taken to justify a watch. And Oz Perkins' The Blackcoat's Daughter is a fantastic example of something that can stand on its own. Perkins has been making quite a name for himself among horror fans since the release of Longlegs, with The Monkey proving to be another massive win for distributor Neon, but he's been making horror movies for a decade now. The Blackcoat's Daughter, while it wasn't widely released until after Perkins' second film, I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House, was his first feature film. Something that Perkins has been very good at since the start of his career is using horror not just as a delivery mechanism for scares, but instead as a very confrontational way to explore relatable human experiences, which is without a doubt a huge reason why his work resonates so much with audiences. The Monkey, his most recent outing, dealt with the quiet whisper constantly at the back of our minds that everyone and everything around us will die, by using humor to touch on a topic that's often too uncomfortable to approach because of how little solace can be found in the face of the inevitable. Longlegs explored the lengths that parents will go to keep secrets from their children and protect them from truths that will hurt. I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House was inspired by Perkins' wishes to communicate with his father, Anthony Perkins, after his death and all of the questions that could never be answered. And The Blackcoat's Daughter touches on how when people are abandoned, neglected, and left alone in the world, they may find themselves seeking connection in anything that will give it to them. Now, I actually hadn't seen this movie until very recently, and I was surprised to see that it's kind of just like a predecessor to Longlegs, with that basically being a sequel to this movie. And another thing that I found very interesting is that while I do really like Longlegs, many of the grievances that I had, particularly with the heavy-handed expository reveal of the entire mystery at the end, are done much better in Perkins' debut film, and the impact of watching the story unravel helps to further demonstrate why the manner in which he chose to reveal the mystery in Longlegs was such a frustrating thing. This is a very bleak film that I regret not seeing sooner because it's really great and also enhances Longlegs in some ways thanks to their connections. The Blackcoat's Daughter is split into 3 distinct sections, each showing the story from the perspectives of the different leads. While the first section is dedicated to Rose, the film opens with Catherine, a young girl at a boarding school who's being faced with a very unsettling dream that seems to be a premonition of the death of her parents, and her fears only continue to grow as the school is unable to make contact with them. Before getting too much into the story, I want to take some time to talk about the stylistic side of this movie because it's quite impressive what Perkins managed to pull off given the low budget he was working with. It's immediately apparent that the dreary, naturalistic look of Longlegs is something that's been a part of his work since the start, with this very desaturated color palette and slow, meticulous camera work that begs you to look through the entirety of the frame, thinking that something may be hiding in the shadows. Every scene of this movie has this drab, depressing, dark look that fits in with the film's themes of isolation and abandonment so well. It's a really creepy looking movie that feels like something you dig up in a weird video rental store back in the day. The score as well is something that really clicked, with Oz's brother Elvis Perkins doing the score himself, which he seemingly didn't enjoy doing because he said that the restrictions of writing music for film almost killed him. He must have gotten over it though because he also did the score for Longlegs, so maybe it's not all that bad. There are lots of these slow synth pads and scratching sounds with witchly string stabs really helping to evoke the deeply dark nature of what's at play in this story. The overall vibe of this movie just really clicked with me, and if you loved the dark tone of Longlegs but weren't into the more absurd and humorous stuff, you may resonate more with this package because it's got more of a straightforward bleak feel. It's much more focused on the darkness. So Catherine is beginning to worry that her parents have gotten into an accident, and as those worries grow, We also see signs of something strange happening with her, where she'll occasionally space out and stare off into blank space with an eerie smile on her face, or she'll say something very off-putting or behave in a way that just seems unnatural.
You smell pretty.
The most important thing going on throughout the first act of this movie is that Catherine, who goes by Kat, is being neglected, abandoned, or otherwise left out on her own by everyone around her. The priest at the boarding school, who Kat seems to have some connection with, is leaving for vacation, and she laments that he won't be able to see the performance that she'll be giving. Her parents haven't shown up yet as they were expected to, and now she's beginning to worry after that ominous dream that something terrible has happened to them. The headmaster, while he does try to help, seems more concerned with passing the care of Kat on to anyone else so he can just get out of here for his own vacation.
After all, we can't let you live here.
He then asks Rose if she would be able to take care of Kat while she waits to either hear from her parents or for them to arrive, because Rose says that she got confused and gave her parents the wrong pickup day, so she'll be here for a couple of extra days, and even though she does wind up getting roped into watching over Kat, she's not all that accommodating to her despite the unsettling circumstances, and leaves her on her own that night to see her boyfriend.
Don't come in my room, okay? And don't touch my shit.
However, it is important to note that Rose isn't neglecting Kat out of selfishness, because she's also being put in a really rough situation by having this thrown on her at this point, because she's days late on her period and is beginning to worry that she's pregnant, which is the real reason that she gave her parents the wrong day. She wants to buy some time to figure things out, talk to her boyfriend about it, and hope that her period will come before her parents arrive so that she doesn't have to deal with this life-altering situation well with them. Her being snippy and negligent with Kat is not her being a bad person, it's just someone who's in a very stressful situation who's now being given another responsibility to juggle while trying to figure her own shit out, and it's overwhelming. She's also rightfully put off by some of the very bizarre behaviors that Kat begins exhibiting, and as things get more strange, she actually seems to become more concerned with her. Also, I wanted to mention that the scene where she gives her performance before school goes out is absolutely haunting. The lyrics of the song are really creepy and elicit a sense of some imposing end.
Into the black night.
This scene gives me chills every time, but aside from being really unsettling, I just find it so sad. It's sort of like a lamentation for the final day of normalcy in the lives of these two girls. Now, Rose's character has a pretty big swing that comes a while through the movie during another plotline concerning Joan, a mysterious young woman who's offered a ride by a pair of parents who happen to be heading in the same direction that she is. I really enjoyed the way that this film was structured because it's told in a non-linear fashion, but you don't really get any clear indications of this until quite a way through this scene at a diner. What I had assumed was happening here was that we were seeing Rose's parents on the way to the boarding school, maybe showing up early because they caught wind of the day they were actually supposed to come and figured that Rose had gotten it wrong. Now, these are in fact Rose's parents, but when her father pulls out this photograph and starts talking about how they lost their daughter 9 years prior, it's a great cold splash of water to the face. It took me a second to actually pick up on what was going on, because my initial thought was that there was some eerie ghost story building up with Rose actually being dead this whole time, but that's not the case. Kind of. Joan's section of the film just takes place many years after the others. Early on, we see Rose having this photo taken, and we get another look at that later where we see her face fall after it was taken, which could be because she can't get her mind off the pregnancy scare that she's going through, but I had another thought that I find to be more compelling. From what I can tell, this is the last photo that Rose will ever have taken of her. And I love the idea that as soon as it happened, she had this dreadful sensation of finality overcome her for a reason unknown to her at the time. Just a cool angle to look at that scene from. So that's basically what's set up with Rose's character. She's dealing with this pregnancy scare and has been given the responsibility of caring for Kat, but we also learn that she's not going to survive through to the end of the movie. Joan is a really interesting character, largely because of the way that they set up a storyline with her that gets flipped on its head, but also because we really don't know for a long time what her role in the overall story is. When she's first approached while waiting at the bus stop, there is a very uneasy feeling established with this man asking her if she needs a ride anywhere. The way they frame this shot of his car down the road in the night, looking like it was intentionally parked at a distance to avoid any potential witnesses making out clearly the make or license plate, makes it feel like Joan is getting herself into a dangerous situation, and that feeling only increases when the man enters her room and starts asking her about God.
People think you'll look for him in some book, or in a church, or a statue, maybe even a candle flame.
The thing that's really great about this, though, is that Joan seems too confident. Her willingness to follow this man down the road before even confirming if his wife is real or not, or her letting him come into her room while she's wearing nothing but a towel fresh out of the shower. These are things that don't generally play along with a good survival instinct, but she does them with little to no hesitation. Also, the dude is played by James Remar, which means he's just got this natural warmth to his personality that makes him feel very genuine in what he's doing. Love this guy in everything. We know that Joan has escaped a hospital of some sort because we see her cutting off a bracelet from one before going to the bus stop. And as her section goes on, we get little glimpses of things that paint a broader and much darker picture of her character than the one that's assumed when we first meet her. To me, the arc that looked to be getting set up here was perhaps she was put in a hospital after being falsely accused of doing something related to what the entity at Bramford did. So now she's trying to get back to the school in the hopes that she can stop it from doing anything further. The cult implications throughout the film sort of push the narrative in a direction of Rose's parents perhaps being involved in that cult and knowing what Joan is doing, so she's unknowingly falling into a trap. It's a very hazy part of the story where you're waiting to see how it connects to the earlier timeline. While Bill is very warm and wants to help Joan, Linda, his wife, is much colder and more shut off to her being here at all, and it's clear from the way that she talks that Bill has done this sort of thing before because she's able to guess everything he said to Joan.
He told you you were mine with her. He actually said that to you, didn't he?
They've fallen into two very different sides of grief, which has caused a clear rift in their relationship because Bill sort of sees Rose everywhere, in every face of a woman her age, and he's clearly trying to hold on to the daughter he lost by showing his care to the people who bring that reminder to him, however inaccurate it may be. Joan really looks nothing like Rose, which shows just how broad that net is for Bill, and you can see that while Linda appears to us like a bitter and cold person, if Joan reminds Bill so much of Rose while barely looking anything like her, the frequency at which this sort of thing must happen would become utterly exhausting for Linda, who's already struggling enough to move on without Bill constantly bringing other young women into their lives. He wants to have that fatherly role so badly, and in doing so is sort of stopping Linda from being able to move forward or breathe because it probably feels like he's not accepting the fact that their daughter is dead. Now, I'm not saying that's what he's doing, but you can see why Linda is the way she is when you look at this from her perspective. From the conversations he has with Joan, he doesn't play coy with what happened and doesn't feel like he's being disingenuous about anything. He just seems like someone who went through something absolutely devastating and has grown to deal with that by trying to help. And because the death of a child is such an inescapable, ever-present trauma, he simply sees her everywhere and wouldn't be able to exist if his response to that was just to break down. So instead, he tries to reach out to those who elicit that reaction from him. I love the dynamic between Linda and Bill and how much can be gleaned from their relationship, but it takes a little while before their actual thematic role in the story becomes clear. They exist to demonstrate something that Oz Perkins continued to explore in his portrayal of the devil in Longlegs, where the devil doesn't only enjoy doing horrible things to people, but it so deeply loves to revel in the aftermath of them and bathe in the trauma caused by what it does. I'm gonna loop back around to Linda and Bill in a little bit, but it's time to talk about Kat and the events that lead up to this film's incredibly bleak and disturbing final act. So as we were talking about, Kat was dealing with every single person around her either abandoning her, shoveling her off to someone else, or potentially dying, as we don't actually get any confirmation for quite a while regarding the fate of her parents. And this is where the demonic possession angle comes in, and where the movie really makes itself stand out in the genre. What I love so much about the way this was handled here is how we watch as the demon sort of feels Kat out as a potential host, taunting her with the visions of what happened to her parents, and first showing itself clearly when this distant, eerie smile appears on her face for seemingly no reason during a conversation with Father Brian. It's taking advantage of the vulnerable position that she's in, and here it's almost like we're seeing it smile because it realizes that what it's trying to do is working, and what it begins doing as things progress is sort of taking over for the parents that it's telling her are no longer there. Because she's being left on her own by everyone, she's particularly vulnerable to anything that's willing to care for her and show her attention, and we get these little details of the entity doing exactly that. While giving her performance at the school, she looks and sees that her parents' seats are empty, and it's not unlikely that she saw the entity sitting there. My favorite detail of this, though, is when she's setting the table for supper with Rose and the two nuns, where she places the cutlery down sort of lazily and then freezes for a moment before correcting it so that it's straight, like the entity is full-on taking the role of a parent by showing her the proper adult way to set the table. You can almost hear the devil whispering in her ear, "No, darling," like this. From the first scene we get of Kat, she's already being manipulated by the devil, so we don't spend any time with her prior to this horrible situation, but it's impossible to avoid just how tragic this all is, and they do a great job of giving us glimpses of who she may have been to help emphasize that. Her being disappointed that Father Brian won't be able to see her performance points at the fact that she values his approval, probably latching on to him as a warm presence in a place where she feels very alone because a priest is, ideally, going to be very comforting. We never see any hint of her having meaningful friendships, and the fact that she doesn't have a cell phone yet means that even if she has friends back at home where her parents live, she hasn't been able to talk with them. But making this even more sad is that from the interaction between the two, you get the sense that she values the connection to Father Brian more than he does.
I mean, I just wish you could stay and see my performance. That's all.
Well, I'm sorry, but this time it just can't be helped.
Kat is deeply alone, and to watch as this horrible, dark being swoops in to take advantage of her being especially vulnerable because of what's happened to her parents and bring her under his wing to ultimately commit horrible acts is as unsettling as it is tragic. Kiernan Shipka's performance as Kat is honestly one of the creepiest possessed performances I've seen in a long time, and it's almost entirely because of how good she is at making this horrific, uncanny expression. She is so good with her face and subtly twisting her expression to feel like you're getting caught off guard by looking straight into the face of someone who's been touched by the darkest pits of evil, with these bone-chilling grins that get worse and worse as things go on. Particularly this moment after Kat throws up at the table where she snaps back at one of the nuns and then just stares at her like this. It's scary as shit. Even though we didn't see much of any of Kat's personality prior to this all happening, she seemed very quiet and shy and probably conducted herself right in line with the rules, so seeing her become more like this as the movie goes on is quite the shift. Her on-screen presence goes from one that elicits nothing but sadness and compassion to one that makes your fight or flight instincts kick into overdrive, and the way she's able to do that with such a quiet performance is really impressive. That's not to mention her physicality during the scene where Rose finds her in the basement, which is the big turning point of the movie where Kat finally gives herself over to the devil after being shown that he's the only one who's willing to care for her. The whole build up to this is really creepy, with Rose walking through the building all by herself and going down into the dingy basement lit by fluorescent lights before being met by a scene that would have me turning heel in a heartbeat. I also really appreciate the pace at which they reveal certain parts of Kat's strange experiences through the day, where the first go around we witness many of them from Rose's perspective, so we don't actually see what's going on, and they wind up feeling more awkward than anything. Like during the scene where Rose is messing with Kat by saying that the nuns are devil worshippers and Kat starts crying, and you start wondering like, damn, is she really getting that upset over this? But then later on, when we get the scene again from Kat's perspective, we see that the reason she was crying was because her perception was beginning to distort in really unsettling ways.
Next time, check their eyebrows. Totally fake.
Rose's voice sounds strange and wobbly. She's beginning to see the shadow in the corner of rooms. everything is starting to shift in a really upsetting manner, and that reframing of this moment is great. Another thing that gets recontextualized is that right after Rose left Kat on her own, Kat took a phone call in the hallway, and we don't know what it was until much later on. When I made my video on Longlegs, I talked about how I didn't like the voice on the phone at the end of the movie, and someone pointed out to me that it was actually just a reference to the Blackcoat's Daughter, tying the two movies together, and now I see what they meant by that.
You can stay here with me.
This phone call comes at a time when the devil feels that Kat is the most open to this sort of manipulation it's hoping to use. It calls her right as she's being left alone again, and talks about the people doing it in a way that probably doubles down on the feelings that Kat's having towards them right now. Now, another angle to all this that I really like is that Rose didn't leave Kat for selfish reasons. That's one of the important things here. The principal is leaving probably because he has plans with family, and the same can be said for Father Brian. Rose leaves Kat on her own because she needs to go have a talk with her boyfriend about a situation they may have gotten themselves into, and her parents aren't here because they're dead. It's not like anyone in the movie is overly horrible to Kat at any point. Rose is kind of bitchy to her, but not in a way that would make her an irredeemably bad person, and she also has a lot on her mind right now that's causing her to lash out at someone she doesn't really know. All of that's to just further emphasize how much Kat is being manipulated in this situation, and I really liked that nuanced approach to the way they handled her possession. All of that creepy buildup and increasingly unsettling behavior from Kat leads up to this moment when she's getting checked by the nurses and they receive a phone call.
Miss Drake, the telephone, please.
Certainly, dear.
Kat says to Rose that the call is regarding the death of her parents, and based on the reaction from the nuns, she is spot on. They send Rose outside, and when the principal arrives with a police escort who likely came along to try and help communicate the news to Kat, they stumble on the brutalized remains of the nuns, who Kat killed when Rose went outside to shovel. Now, this sequence is drip-fed pretty gradually while jumping through the film's timelines, but when we get the scene of Kat actually killing one of them, I was honestly caught off guard by how disturbing it is. It just feels so bleak and dirty in a way that's a massive tonal shift for the movie, since up to this point there's been no violence whatsoever, but I do love how you can feel it starting to boil in Kat in those bone-chilling expressions she makes. By this point, she has fully given herself over to the devil and is now playing out the acts that she's told to, and this sort of clinical way she goes about stabbing this woman makes it feel really impersonal and disconnected. It is a nasty sequence, and with the knowledge that Rose isn't going to make it through the movie, the tension now gets cranked up. Big part of this is that we understand Rose to be pregnant, so now we're grappling with that really upsetting realization of what's going to happen. But it seems like Perkins did have a bit of restraint when it came to just how dark he wanted the movie to be, because Rose discovers moments before her death that she isn't actually pregnant and her period just came many days later than it usually does. So there's a strange sort of relief that's felt when that reveal comes. You gotta find it in the little things, I suppose, because she really doesn't last long after this. The way that they build up this sequence is so good as well, because there's something uniquely disturbing about the way that this movie handles its violence that feels almost too grounded, which makes it a hell of a lot more disturbing, almost like you're watching hidden camera footage of something that would go on to have a true crime documentary made on it. This shot of her seeing the bloodied rags and remains at the base of the stairs, there's just something about it that makes me really uncomfortable. It feels so like sickly and dirty. I love the misdirect as well, with the door shutting when Rose comes out of the bathroom, so it makes it seem like Kat just left the hall and went down the stairs. It makes that reveal of Kat coming from the other door all the more impactful. Once again, good God, is Kiernan Shipka ever good with her physical performance. Rose's death scene is an extremely dark moment, and it's where the film's visual tone feels like it's finally being reflected in the on-screen events, like this is the inevitable conclusion to everything that has been building up this whole time. That realization that Rose was never pregnant to begin with is another thing that makes this worse in some ways, because that means she never actually had any reason to tell her parents to hang back. If she hadn't suspected she might be pregnant, she would have already been gone and would have never been in this situation in the first place. This is all then leading up to where Kat and Joan's stories connect. Because if you haven't already pieced it together, they're the same person. No shame, by the way. I have no problem admitting that I did not pick up on the fact that they were the same person until like the last 10 or 15 minutes of the movie. I was a little tired that day, to be fair. Anyway, that's how this all falls into place. After doing what she did, Kat took the heads of the two nuns and Rose down to the place where she first pledged her allegiance to Satan, and when the cop found her, he shot her, which is why we saw that bullet wound on Joan. After years of sitting in the mental hospital, she killed a nurse and stole her identity in the hopes that she could get back to the school and the spot where she made her connection with the devil. And this is where the movie once again takes a really great, unique angle to the possession film and leans into the isolated tragedy of this story. After Kat did what she did, she was hospitalized, and Father Brian came to her knowing that the girl he knew would never do this on her own and performed an exorcism on her. I love this scene because just when you start to get worried that they're doing a generic exorcism thing here, they twist the loneliness of Kat's story once again, with her seeing the shadow of the entity standing in the room. I adore this moment. It's this quiet, eerie scene where the devil simply fades away and leaves her on her own once again, which is what leads into Joan's story with her desperately trying to find the entity. She winds up killing Rose's parents in a sequence that's already harrowing enough because of her mother's panicked begging of Bill not to stop here, since this is where Rose died and she simply can't face it. And when he pulls over to let Joan out because she says she's sick, she begins her offering to the devil with this horrifically sad end for a pair of parents who lost their daughter to this very person 9 years prior. It's really the conclusion of this movie that makes The Blackcoat's Daughter such a successful overall package. The buildings of the school are boarded up, it's been left abandoned and cold, and Joan brings the decapitated heads of Bill and Linda down into the boiler room. But when she gets to the furnace, she finds nothing but cold iron in a dark room. The flame doesn't come on, no sounds are heard anywhere, the entity does not return. I love this detail of her pulling her hand back quickly from the furnace when she goes to touch it. It's a perfect way of showing the denial and terror that she feels at the idea of there being nothing here. So when she feels nothing, it's almost like she was unwilling to accept that reality and went to try again, like just for real this time, because it's gonna be there. But there truly is nothing. She returns outside in the cold, bleak morning and wanders down the street alone before turning around and looking back at the school, breaking down in a fit of harrowing screams and devastated cries as she realizes that it was all for nothing and she truly is alone after all. Hell, from the very beginning, this was probably the devil's plan. By taking advantage of the abandonment Kat was feeling when she was younger, it managed to take a young girl and twist her into committing a number of horrific acts, only for it to leave her in the cold after all of this, ending the lives of her 6 victims and destroying hers all through her own actions because it knew it could bring her to do this. Now, of course, it's also important to note that the exorcism likely played a hand in this. But I also think it's painting a clear picture of someone who tried to find connection in whatever would show it to her, regardless of the nature of the thing, and then having it utterly destroy her because she grew entirely dependent on that darkness as her one source of connection. If you really wanted to, you could look at this whole movie entirely through the lens of someone dealing with severe mental health problems and say there was never an entity in the first place, but I don't buy that. The film opening with a premonition of her parents' deaths kind of destroys that angle, but the rest of the movie could definitely be taken that way if you wanted to, and you could reconcile that one issue with some headcanon, but I find this to be a much more interesting story from the perspective of a genuine possession because of the way we watch how it manipulates her into believing that it actually cares, only for it to leave her in the cold when she served her purpose. And then it can move on to sitting in dolls for a bit before it gets bored and tries out some new way to spread the horror that it brings. The Blackcoat's Daughter is a dark, bleak, and bone-chilling possession film that even 10 years later is easily some of Oz Perkins' best work, and it deserves a hell of a lot more attention than it gets. Everything from the dark visual style, the disorienting score, the chilling performances, and its lonely story, it's all in service of an overall package that is so deeply unsettling, with a conclusion that is probably one of the most memorable endings to a possession film that I have ever seen. Thanks for watching through to the end. I hope you enjoyed the video enough that you want to see more, and if that's the case, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell because YouTube can sometimes suck at recommending channels. A huge thank you to my wonderful Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members who are a massive help in allowing me to continue committing as much time as I can to making these videos. If you want to gain access to things like behind the scenes material or gain early access to my videos, consider supporting me on either platform. As always, thank you for stopping by Rocklin Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.